Welcome back to Contractor Evolution. Benji and Igor here from the studio for episode 5 of our 6-part Ultimate Hiring Funnel series.
Now, if you're listening to this, you definitely already know the cost of just one bad hire to your profitability, your team morale, your brand, certainly your own personal stress levels. But what I want you to really think about right now is the true cost over your entire career of not being an exceptional interviewer, of being someone that is susceptible to frequent hiring mistakes. As we say all the time on this show, you run a people-driven business. Your ability to objectively analyze someone's previous behavior and use that to predict their future performance and do that with a high degree of accuracy is one of the deadliest skills you can have as an entrepreneur. Your growth potential is directly related to how well you can team build, and interviewing is arguably the most crucial step in the whole process. Understanding a candidate, not just in terms of what's on their resume, but actually their deep-rooted wiring, their personality style, their strengths, their weaknesses, their core values, and even their wants and needs for the future, allows you to be an extremely precise decision maker when it comes to personnel.
This is why we're really excited to be joined today by James Alisch, the managing director of 1-800-GOT-JUNK, the world's largest junk removal service. James is at the helm of a brand doing $490 million a year in revenue and is executing a multi-year strategy to exceed $1 billion by 2025. Now, over the course of his extensive career, James has done literally thousands of interviews to build powerhouse teams. He knows this all-important process inside and out, and we're thrilled to have him on to share his wisdom and his insights on the topic of interviewing with you.
Yeah, just before we get into it, guys, if you want to look at the interviewing framework that we discuss in this episode, check out the link in the description. You can download it for free and use it in your next interview.
So let's get into some interviewing secrets with one of the best in the game, James Alisch. You're watching Contractor Evolution, where we unpack the systems, tactics, and skills you need to take your fast-growing contracting business to the next level.
You're here to learn what it takes to scale up, work less, and increase profitability. You've come to the right place.
Stay tuned to learn what separates the new breed of contractor from the old school, and welcome to your ultimate guide on the business of contracting.
Hey, just before we jump into things, I wanted to let you know you can get the free resources that we talk about in this episode in the show description. So hit pause right now, go download them, and they'll be waiting in your inbox by the time we finish this episode.
James Alisch, thanks for coming to the studio and joining us on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Igor.
We really appreciate you being here, James. I want to start with what I think is an easy one, okay? So
Softball.
Why do we interview? What are we hoping to accomplish by doing these?
Yeah, great question, Benji. I think that's might be an easy one, but the interesting piece in my experience is not everybody's always clear on that. So from my experience or my perspective, if you're going to invest the time in doing an interview properly, there's 3 reasons that you would do it. One is that you would be scoring someone on some specific criteria, very specific criteria. So you want to have a roadmap for what you're interviewing the person for, and you want to have an objective score on those things at the end of the interview so that you can make a decision.
Totally.
You know, on moving the person forward or not. And ultimately so that you can predict performance of the person. Like when you're interviewing the person, you got the criteria, you score them. What you're trying to do is you're trying to predict their performance given that you may have just met them and you're trying to see what their fit is. So that's number 1. Number 2 is you're trying to find out the gaps because not everybody's perfect. You're never going to find that perfect candidate. So even if they do score well on certain criteria, where are their weaknesses?
They got stuff to work on.
Yeah, their limitations so that you can coach them and you have a realistic expectation going in. And that is part of the interview. That's part of the reference checks, but trying to create a full picture of not just where they're strong, but where do you need to be prepared to lean in with them. And the third reason would be to sell. You know, the stronger the candidate, the more attracted they are to structure, and the more attracted they are to someone who really is clear on what they're looking for and what they're not looking for. So the reality is part of how you conduct an effective interview is to attract the candidate to say yes, should you want to offer them the role. So those would be the 3 reasons.
And I think that selling piece is the one that's underestimated the most, particularly in this contracting space. There's everyone needs to realize, like, the people that you want on your team, the A+ players, they're probably going to 3 or 4 other interviews that week. You are absolutely not the only option that they have in front of them. So speaking about the company, speaking about the values, the role, in a way, we talked about this in the last episode in this series as well when we were doing these interview setup calls, being able to capture that person's attention in a way that makes them think, you know what, I think of the 3 routes I have in front of me, this one feels like the best one. That's the sales piece.
Yeah. And I really like James's second point there. I think a lot of people don't really register this in their mind is that you're really building a long-term relationship with this person that begins at that interview. And if you're going to lead them and coach them and develop them, this is such a great starting point to understand where the fit is exceptional and where there are some gaps. Because, I mean, we've all felt this, right? You're kind of like trying to put this like square peg into a round hole. No one's ever perfect. Like, how often does someone come across your desk where they are like the most perfect fit in every way? It's so rare.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't kind of build a career of developing great leaders under you where you can only slot in the perfect ones. You have to develop in a way where you can put in people that aren't quite perfect around all the edges and develop them. And that absolutely starts at the interview process, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So James, let me ask you this. You've done a huge number of interviews. Your career has grown from hiring painters and running painting crews to now, like most recently, interviewing, current CFOs of large national companies and everything in between. Do these principles around interviewing change? How are they different? Like if you're hiring a painter versus a CFO in a very large organization, like what's different? What's the same?
Yeah, I think great question. I think what's different is, I can probably expect, or one would expect when you're just a little more advanced in your career, you're interviewing people at a higher level, that you're going to be talking primarily to qualified candidates. So that's a difference, right? So it's less of are they capable, and it's more on fit.
Yeah.
Right. So whereas, if you're hiring a technician or you're hiring a laborer of any kind, part of what you're trying to determine is competence as well as fit.
Right.
Right. And so there's a couple more things that you're probably probing in on. But in terms of what's the same, you know what, Igor, I believe that the principles of know what you're looking for being kind of the foundation for an interview, that doesn't change at all. It doesn't matter what the role is, what the level is, whether you're a senior executive of a very, very large organization or whether you're a junior salesperson coming on and you're the first salesperson in the company. The hard work of the interview is for the person that's making the decision to be really clear on how they're going to make their decision. Because when interviews break down, or also known as we waste a lot of our time, is when it becomes very subjective, right? And you have these conversations with others and go, well, I feel that the person is this, or I like this, right? That's not an interview. That's a conversation, right? So the more clear you are on how you're going to make your decision, which is really the hard work that comes up front, and that's I'm sure you're familiar and you guys use the language of a fit model. The more you know what your model is and how you're going to determine, like really, okay. So I'm saying in my business, to the audience, it's a sales role or it's an operations manager role. Well, what does that mean for you? Like, what are your top 5 things you want to see? Because there could be 15 things that you want, but what are the 5 most important? So that doesn't change regardless of the role. And to me, that's kind of the bedrock of trying to find the right person.
I love it. And that's such a piece that I think a lot of people, especially as they're developing as a leader and an entrepreneur and are interviewing and their company's growing and you're interviewing more and more people and higher level people, that's such a step that people miss, is that pre-planning and pre-thinking when you're designing the role. It's just, it is something that often gets completely missed. So on that note, what I would love to do is to dive into, for you, what are the steps that you go through on every interview? Like, what are the fundamental principles that stay, whether you're hiring a technician or a head of operations or anything in between? So tell us a bit about, like, right from the initial kind of candidate profile, the ideal candidate profile, how do you kind of think through what you're looking for, developing what is this fit model, the preferences and abilities, what am I looking for? How do you go through that whole process? Walk us through it.
I'm going to say something before I answer your question, and you can come back to it later if you want, but just made me think of something is when you're I'm thinking about our organization, 1-800-GOT-JUNK, which is a home services business like many of your listeners are. or any service business, whether it's in a franchise or a local, someone that's building a brand locally, one of the things that I find people are doing more and more, and it's more and more dangerous in the labor market that we're getting into and are experiencing right now across North America, is making gross assumptions based on what they see in an application or an applicant.
Yeah.
Right.
It happens a lot less as you get to mid-management, senior management, and executive level. Like, that's not a problem, but just for your audience, just a heads up that be careful how much you assume based on a first impression.
Right.
And speed to lead trumps everything. So you want to be qualifying people in, not qualifying people out. But maybe we can come back to that. Just that thought triggered when you asked the question. But it's you can miss a lot of good people because what you read on a page isn't necessarily the way that you would have written it. But
Are you talking like people might be overvaluing certain? Hey, I really need someone with 5 years of landscaping experience, and so
Sure.
you make it too narrow of a piece of criteria. And it's like, actually, this person that like managed a Dairy Queen for a couple of years, which maybe like doesn't look like your perfect fit. They actually have everything that you would need. You just didn't do like the probe and you didn't dig into them. So you're actually putting too much on what's on the resume and not enough on like the interview, the values, their previous history.
yeah, that's it, Benji. I think you got to be careful how many assumptions you make.
Yeah.
And I think the reason often people make the assumptions, and I totally know, Igor, I'm going a different direction than your question, but we'll bring this train back. People generally make assumptions or can make assumptions because they've had a bad experience or been burned in the past, and they project that onto the person or the application that they see. I just say, like, if you're trying to grow a service business from 500,000 to $1 million, or $1 million to $3 million, or 10 million, or whatever it is, your biggest asset is your people, and just slow down. Don't make any assumptions. And your example of what was it? Managing a
like if you were looking for a new landscape technician or a foreman or some sort of like boots on the ground type role, what I've seen people do a lot is they like insist that you need to have all of these qualifications, you need to have these tickets, you've worked with this equipment and these tools, and it's like you're looking for a needle in a haystack in an already extremely competitive market. Why don't you just like loosen up on what you say you need and actually look at the individual? Because you could probably make that person into an unbelievable asset for your company, but you're looking at it in this very black and white sort of gridded way that I think is to their detriment.
Yeah, exactly. What I'm saying is just be careful on your assumptions, and you don't want to miss out on people. And in my experience, you hire for fit, especially at the level of the businesses that we're talking about. And if you use your example, like, can you train the competence of how to, deliver an on budget, on quality standard customer experience, landscaping project? Can you train that? You probably can. If a person has, high customer orientation, they are dependable, they have a high need for money, they whatever, go on. You could go on and on. They are oriented to goals, right? All these types of things, and sometimes that shows up really, really poorly in a first impression of an email or a resume. Anyways, we don't have.
But
to
it's
get caught
your
up on this.
job to figure that out.
Yeah. So don't. You want to start wider, right?
Yeah.
Start wider, and the challenge for that is time. Right?
Yeah.
Because if we've got entrepreneurs that are listening to us, they're like, yeah, James, that's great. I can talk to all kinds of people, but I don't have time because I'm in my vehicle or I'm leading other crews or other people. I get that totally. So we can talk about that later. Then find someone who can dedicate their focus to finding you the best people, because that's the biggest component to your success as you grow.
100%, right? And we did speak to this a few episodes ago in this Ultimate Hiring Funnel series, where there is huge ROI on having people drive recruiting. I think you guys see that, like in the O2E work. Like, how many people would you guys have that touch recruiting in some way?
Well, everybody touches it, but I think the businesses that are growing the fastest, and just speaking from my own experience of businesses I have owned, when we've hit kind of critical inflection points, if you're in a service business, people are your biggest asset. And when you can dedicate resources to that, and when I say to that, it doesn't even have to be the full funnel recruiting. It could just be the top of funnel, people who are trained and competent at how to job broadcast and how to fill a funnel, where to apply the right time, what times of day, etc. Just that focus is everything, and then that allows you that choice. So how many people? Everybody touches it, and I'd say, in a system of the 1-800-GOT-JUNK system is $500 million in revenue. We've got 160 franchise partners. We've got 60-ish full-time dedicated recruiters that probably touch half of the system, so or more, and then we've got a bunch of others that are part-time dedicated. There's stats on this that says when you're I'm not even going to tell you what the number is because I don't want to dissuade the listeners from jumping in with both feet. I believe this is an investment. You're at $1 million, you want to get to 10 million or 5 million, invest in this role. But there's all kind of data on that that can give you some backup to prove it out.
Yeah. So having a full top of funnel, pretty crucial to having the rest play out.
Yeah. So
effectively.
Totally. So do you want to go now to your question on the process?
Yeah. So tell us a bit about the process. So let's just say like we are at a point where we have a strong funnel. You are starting to have people that are going to sit in front of you at your desk.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about your process. Like what are you doing prior to meeting with these individuals? So on and so forth.
And I'm your audience and I'm hearing this. That's the lens that we're going through.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, step one, I think we touched on a little bit. It's that roadmap or the fit and really wrestling with yourself and saying, okay, how I would do it is I would start wider and brainstorm. Okay, here's 10 things that I'd like to see in somebody that works for me. Sales experience, the ability to drive a vehicle, getting right down to it, attainment, the preference to hit goals, a track record for leadership, the ability to finish what you start, emotional control, values alignment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I got 11 things. I can't interview for 11 things, but I can interview for like 5, right? So what are the core 5, right? And I'm going to pick up some notes on the others as I go. So define your core 5 or 6. So here are my criteria. Once I've got my criteria, then I would weight them because not all criteria are necessarily equal.
Right.
So this is the part where you say wrestle with yourself because you have to make some of these tough decisions, right? If this is like a sales guy or sales leader, maybe you're saying, well, his ability to be super precise and detail oriented isn't the most critical thing among some of these others.
Right. Like his gas tank, his orientation to goals, his experience in leading a sales team, in that role specifically, or if I had somebody who was leading a call center and ran my workforce management, precision and detail is pretty important, right? Every decision impacts a lot of dollars. So the roadmap and then prioritizing them.
Right.
And the beauty of this is, for everybody that's listening, the great news is you don't really have to do this over and over, right? Like as you're scaling a business, and I'm sure you guys talk about this all the time, the objective is to have this done for the roles and ideally in advance of when you need the roles.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got these models clear. And then you just use them over and over again. But if you don't have them, the first time you build them, and so I've got my 5 criteria, I weight them. And then in terms of preparation, I would advise people don't underestimate, the importance of just giving yourself a little bit of focused time to think in advance about the fit and who the person is. Yeah. Again, part of the prep sometimes is just opening yourself up to what you may see in the CV or the letter and saying, hey, I'm got some problems with this. Just relax and just be open and do your thing. Yeah. And then when you meet with a candidate, I'd recommend the person follow a process that looks something similar to, you've got bookends to the interview. On one side, similar to any sales process, you would start with rapport. And to me, rapport is the art of getting somebody else talking. Yeah. And that's how you would start. You just check in, you would connect with the person. Then you would move to laying out a clear agenda for the interview, which is structure, which we talked earlier about. There's a bit of selling going there. Like I'm not selling features, but I'm conveying competence. Yeah. That's what the selling is.
I've done this before. This isn't my first time doing an interview. That's the impression you want to give the person sitting across from you.
I don't have an abundance of time. I'm taking this really seriously. Yeah. I really appreciate you being here, and I'm going to guide us in how we're going to use the time. Any questions? That's kind of the orientation that you want them to be feeling. So you lay out the agenda. And then you go through your probing, which you want to talk a bit about that specifically, we can. 100%. But then the meat and potatoes of the interview is you walking through the person's experiences and looking for very specific examples in life where you're probing in and you're really proving to yourself that what you're looking for is there or it isn't there. Wrap up with the allowance of the person to ask you some questions. Make sure you always give them the opportunity to get clear on whatever you need. Then you set the clear next steps, whatever that may be, and we can talk a bit about the end of the interview and how you might be talking and painting the picture for future opportunities and how that might look a little bit different with people.
Dive into what you just said a second ago. You're walking through their previous experience, and you're looking for evidence of certain traits that you have deemed are important. Yep. And that's done. That's premeditated. We did that in our ideal candidate profile. So let's just say you're getting to You've done the rapport. They're comfortable. They've taken the mask off. You've set purpose and outcomes. They know why they're there. They understand the process that's about to follow. But now you're into that focus time. You've shifted your energy.
Yep.
And I'm going to use an example of attainment. Like, we've deemed that the role we're hiring, we need to have someone that's goal oriented. Mm-hmm. It's how they're wired. It's in their DNA. How would you actually probe for that trait? Like, give us an example of what that might sound like in a James Alisch interview.
Sure. So if I was someone in your audience, and whether it was a sales role, an operations role, before I started probing for attainment, I would get a bit of a roadmap for who they were, which typically you could see on a LinkedIn profile if they have one. Mm-hmm. You can see on a resume. You kind of got that in front of you. But I would just validate that before I started probing. I'd say, let's talk about you and what's the journey and what you've done. And I would literally map it out. With the person, if I'm in person with them, and say, okay, in the last 5 years, here's kind of what you've done. Here are your
literally
jobs.
have it out like on a timeline where you're kind of looking at what have they been up to in the last 5-10 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Highs, lows.
Yes, highs and lows.
Stuff.
Because where the examples, Benji, are going to come out are in that person's life. Yeah. Right? Like, whether it's their jobs, their relationships, their community involvement, their sports, whatever. Like, what you want to know is, what do I have to work with? What's the roadmap of this person's life? Okay, so I'm talking to Igor, and look at this. He's done some skiing. He's got a family of 5. He's worked at 3 different places, and he's moved twice. Okay, good. That's what I'm going to talk about. So to your question, now that I have those 6 things, attainment will show up or won't show up in every one of those things.
Right.
So if you, for example, if he's talking about, so I know this roadmap. So Igor, let's talk about this job here. When you were working for Johnson Industries, tell me about that role. Get the person talking a little bit. What were you working towards there, Igor? What were some goals that you were shooting for at that time? If someone has attainment, if I were to ask this guy right now, what were some goals in his last job? It'd be very easy for him to answer the question.
I love goals.
Right? Someone with high attainment, there's a good friend and a mentor of mine, Tim Clark, decades ago probably. I'm sorry, Tim, I'm dating us. He would have said something to me that was quite funny, but stuck with me. Someone with high attainment will have that come out in how they tie their shoes, right? And I laugh because I think of myself and my day and how my day goes. And I know what time I'm up. I've got a goal to have my coffee made by a certain time. Yeah. I'm going to have this done by 6:20 in the morning. By this time, I want to be doing this. And before I get to my first meeting, this, and this has to get done.
You're wired that way.
It's a preference that you have, right? Yeah. And so if you find yourself having to, and this is the same as any preference or characteristic that we were talking about, we could talk about, Benji, the harder you have to look for something, the more likely it isn't there.
And I think I've heard you say that's the hardest part of an interview, is when you perhaps you like someone, you really need someone to fill this position. Oh yeah. And you're just like you're digging, you're going to the bottom of the barrel, and you're like, well, okay, where's this attainment here? Is it where
you're sure you've never set a goal?
Yeah, right.
Right, and that connects back to what we talked about earlier when we were talking about the fact you have to have flow at the top of your funnel, because if you've got no choice, you're more tempted to drop your standards and say, I have to fill this role with someone that I believe, even if I've done a great interview, isn't a strong fit. Forget about ideal, that doesn't exist, but just a strong fit, right? Yeah. So the recipe for that, to solve that, is go back to what we talked about earlier. Get somebody focused on supporting you, filling your top of funnel, and take that seriously. It's an investment, like marketing dollars.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to get back to this whole probing thing, and we're using the example of attainment and someone that's naturally has a strong,
orientation
deep wired.
Goals. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Orientation to goals. So you're walking through their life story over the last 10 years, the highs, the lows. How are you kind of peeling back the onion? What is your general approach to getting deeper and deeper into specific scenarios, right? So you said you get them talking, you're working at Johnson Industries. What were your objectives? Where might you go from there?
Yeah, I believe truth shows up a couple of levels down. When you think about the people that your audience is interviewing, I'm assuming primarily, field sales teams or operations teams.
Maybe like laborers, foremen, project managers, like potentially operations managers for bigger businesses. There'd be like an administrative, so office managers, secretaries, bookkeepers, maybe an estimator salesperson on the other side, that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Been there with all of them and totally get it. And so the truth shows up a couple layers down, because so with your example, Igor, they say that they've got a previous employment at Johnson Industries, whatever it was. And you say, well, what were some things you were trying to accomplish there? And let's say you're Mike that I'm interviewing, and you say, what were some things you were trying to accomplish in that role?
So I had to bring in $1.5 million a year in revenue, in sales, and I had to bring in work at that hits a certain gross profit mark, and I had quarterly goals, and I was held accountable by month, essentially.
Okay, usually it's not. That's a layup. Usually that's
Okay,
that much.
it's typically
to work
worse.
with.
I had to bring in a bunch of sales. My manager didn't tell me exactly how much, but I knew I had to work super hard.
Okay, so we got something. He's got a sales target there, right?
Yeah.
So I've got a sales target. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to try to unpack how, if I'm looking for attainment, like what your level of attainment is, and how strongly you go after goals. What I want to look. I'm just going to talk about that, and I'm going to just go into that, and I'll show you how I'll do that in a second. But I'm looking to see. Was this something that was actually hard for him, easy for him, meaningful to him, not meaningful for him? Somebody can be given a number as a salesperson by a sales manager, and that person, Mike over here, he can say, yeah, my goal is selling $1 million in sales. He could have no attainment. He just worked in a business where somebody said your goal is
Totally,
$1 million. So I would say
maybe the brand was great and work came in, and
he was lucky and away he went.
Yeah.
So I would say, okay, Mike, let's start talking about that. Tell me about that. Who set your goals? How did that go? How many years were you there again? Okay, so how did the goals vary by year? Okay, so just with this goal, what was that first one called? Okay, who set that? What was his name? What was your sales manager's name? At that point, you can tell how easy it is for the person to answer the question, or how much they have to really scramble and think. And that's showing me that this probably isn't that natural, but I keep going. So I try to recreate the environment of where that actually happened. And what I'm trying to decipher is how authentic and real is this? What did it really mean to the person? How hard did they have to work? And that kind of gives me what I'm looking for. So I would take Mike down a path of, where were you? How did it happen? Who were the very specific people that were involved? Talk to me about the challenges involved with that.
Right.
How did you overcome those challenges? And if there's nothing there, I stop, because what we all do when we need people badly or we're in a time crunch, we just keep asking the same question, and eventually we're going to hear what we want to answer, right? Like, oh, there's the attainment finally. Thanks, Mike. Right?
There was a goal.
There was a goal. Yes, I can justify myself spending time with this person now. But you can't do that, right? Like, you have to be honest with yourself and say, I'm either working too hard to find this, or the example is there. And if the example is there, it's not hard for the person to give you the example.
No.
Yeah.
Right? If a person is high precision, or they're very detail oriented, very structured, we all know them.
Yeah.
It's not difficult to find that. Right? You talk about, somebody's in an admin role or a finance role for you, and you're looking for precision. It's like, how do you organize your time? Talk to me about that. As a matter of fact, can you show me that?
Yeah.
Show me what you do. When do you do that? Why do you do it that way? If someone's, high precision, like, they're going to love showing you because they're proud of it.
Right.
Someone isn't, it'll be very obvious.
Yeah.
You're looking for example after example after example after example, and the people that genuinely have that trait, it will show up in spades. It's going to be everywhere.
Yeah, it's
It'll
there,
be in
it's
recent history. It will be in way back in their past. It's everywhere.
Yeah, but so the important point I want to highlight, and this is great in this context that James gave, your job as an interviewer is to help them be open, to set it up that way, and then to lead them down that conversational path, right? You're there to facilitate the environment and the conversation and dig kind of deeper and bring it to life for them, but even more importantly for you to bring the scenario to life. That's your job. And then the truths will either be there or they won't. That's kind of what we're saying, right?
Yeah.
But what we don't care about is what they say they will do. Like
we didn't even get into that.
This is a huge pitfall that I think a lot of our listeners will make.
You'll do really great work, James, won't you?
They'll go, that's just it. Hey, you know what? This job requires a certain level of grit. It requires a certain level of tenacity, long days, physically demanding. You're going to do that, right? Yeah, you bet. Absolutely. For sure. It's like that means nothing. You're always looking at previous behavior, using that to predict their future performance.
Yeah. We didn't mention that explicitly, but that is super fundamental, I think, to everything we're talking about. When James was talking about that timeline is in the past.
100%. Yeah. It is. All your decisions are based on what they've done. So basically, paraphrasing what you said, Benji, that example you just went through, that's not an interviewing question. That's It's a hopeful discussion.
Alley-oop. Yeah, you're teeing them up an easy one.
Yeah. Good. So James, as you open up these kind of stories in this environment for them to speak to the things that they've done, do you then systematically, I just want to understand how this works for you in your interview planning. Are you systematically going through different preferences and abilities that you are looking for? Like you'll dive into attainment and you're like, okay, I got a sense of where it is and I'll score them. Now I'm going to switch to a totally different topic. Like how coachable are they and their ability, where are they at in their level of introspection? Are you kind of going one, then the other, then the one after? What's your model?
I'll maybe add one more step to that, to kind of the process that you just mapped out that we talked about before I answer that specifically. When you have the criteria, and this goes without saying, but I'll say it anyways. When you've got the criteria you're looking for to score, base a decision on, way of looking at that is call it your interview scoring matrix, right? You've got these things that I'm gonna bump up against that are objective that I'm gonna make my decision with. If you're involving any other people in the equation, make sure that they're clear on what is then ultimately the result of the role that you want to see this hire being able to do. So for example, probably the most broadly, if you were hiring somebody to be a territory manager for your business and you're expanding into a new market, you've got your scoring matrix so that you can predict the person's volume, quality, and profitability. So the reason I say that is, we didn't touch on it earlier, is just have the end in mind of what you're trying to score for. The reason I say that is because we touched on build the system and scale the system earlier. Like you don't have to do this every time. Everybody listening probably is saying, James, well, why would you do that? I'm the person doing all the interviews. Like I know why I'm doing this.
But will you be forever?
Exactly. Take the time, right? Document it, map it out so that you can insert somebody and you can coach people to do this for you and scale your business so you don't have to be the person doing it all the time. So put that on pause. Now I'm going to ask you to go back to your question because I almost forgot it.
Yeah, so the question is essentially we're building out the model to your exact point right now. You've built a bit of a model. So you're saying if I'm hiring an operations manager, I need them to have traits 1,
X,
2,
Y,
3,
Z,
4.
yeah.
Exactly. So in your interview, and I'm just thinking to your kind of interview agenda, very practically speaking, you are interviewing for the first one, and then will you kind of zoom back out and now go into another one?
Yeah. So I'll have it in front of me, and for each role, it should become old hat because you're getting clear on what you're looking for. And it's not, I wouldn't say, Igor, it's completely linear. Okay. Right? It's not totally linear. You will follow a path, and let's say you have 5 things that you're looking to score the person on. You go through them, in the order that whatever your preferred order is. Usually I would go with the one that's weighted the highest first. You want to get your most important ones done in case you run out of time. But what will happen is in those conversations, other things will show up, right? So we go back to the example of, I'll just pick one, like what is this person's emotional control, or what is their ability to lead a team and inspire a team of salespeople or crews or whatever it is. Say you're interviewing on leadership. As I'm going into their previous experiences on leadership and asking them about the different roles and where were you and how hard was it, how easy was it, what were you responsible for, how did you get that role, tell me more about that, who were the people, who did you like, who didn't you like, where were the conflicts, all that stuff. Other things will surface. Yeah. So I'm looking for leadership, but I'm actually making little notes about their values, or I'm making little notes about whatever, like their organization. So it's not a completely linear, focus where you're just listening for one thing. It's your ears are always open. Depending on the candidate, you may knock out 3 criteria just going down one path.
Right.
So you're more focused on the life stage and life path, because maybe when they were working at Johnson Industries and trying to hit some sort of sales goal, they were part-time doing their MBA and had to balance both. And maybe their child was very sick in a very difficult time, and they had to balance all of those things and be present maybe as a father and do the right thing for the education that they're pursuing and perform at their job. You're saying you might see multiple traits all through that maybe same year of their life.
Absolutely. And going back to what Benji said earlier, like the art of the interview is really leveraging someone's past experiences to predict their future performance, right? So you're leveraging their past experiences and trying to really understand what did they go through in those past experiences, and then taking it and applying it to what you want to find out, like whether it's goal orientation or leadership or whatever it is, precision.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all about just going deep and understanding what things meant to people, what were they going through, why, And you'll pick up little nuggets that'll kind of cross a number of the criteria.
So as you're collecting the data from the past in a fairly free-flowing way, you talk about attainment for a bit, but then you move on to their problem solving for a little while, and then maybe you go to their leadership capacity. You're building the picture. How do you mentioned like the interview scoring matrix? Can you just break down kind of how, what's an A, what's an F, what's a B? Like, how do you be as objective as possible with, what is essentially is just someone's memory? Like, how do you score it and then compare it to each other? Because I think that's something that can be really, really kind of gray, and you want it to be as black and white as possible.
Sure, especially for people that are new to following a process like this, or never been coached on it, or never had it been taught to them. So I think, Benji, you're asking, like, how do I know how to score somebody?
Yeah.
So I hear you. Like, give me a tool sheet to score somebody, but how do I know what the score is, right? So real simple. I'd recommend 1 to 5, right? 5 high, 1 low. And 2 factors you're looking for is how many examples of that you're seeing. And the more examples I see of someone's tenacity or someone's grit or their leadership, if it comes up frequently, that's one way to score them higher. And the other one is the significance of the examples. So I will weight high if for example, you're probing on somebody's values, you're trying to get a feel for what this person's values is, and it's maybe somebody earlier on in their career, and they have some examples where it was really, really hard for them to show up and stand up for what they believed in, which is really how you interview for values. But it was significant. Like, this was a doozy. Well, that's okay. That's to me, that's worth a couple of little examples.
Yeah.
So if somebody was interviewing, they said, hey, this person's a 4 on this, or they're 5s are easy because it's all over the place. Right?
Like, it's just oozing out. Like, it's just there.
Yeah, it's there. It's easy. 2s and 1s you're not going to bring back anyway, so that's also easy. But when they're kind of 3s, that's
kind of there, but it's not significant.
Which is why you have to go prove it. Where in the past have they shown this? Where in the past did you see this in the interview?
Yeah.
So you gotta see a couple of examples, 2, 3, 4 examples.
And that's the hard part, I think, I find for myself as an interviewer, is like, you have to really be objective with yourself. Like, is it there, or are you having to convince yourself that it is really strong enough? To James's point, like, if you're doing your job as an interviewer, helping them bring the story to life, it will really show up. And you will see it. So I want to come in just with one really important point for everybody listening. We're talking about a lot of really awesome stuff just in this interview framework. If you want to see this in real life, we've actually created this interview matrix with these preferences and abilities, and they are available. If you go to the show notes and click the link in the description, you'll be able to download this interview matrix that James is talking about with these different preferences and abilities, and how we might go about scoring them. So I just want to ask you, I think this is kind of assumed, but I just want to say it explicitly. I'm assuming you are taking notes on all this, right? Because if you're interviewing a number of people, you are tracking this stuff, right? Even though maybe it does make it a bit more difficult because you'd need to be fully present in the conversation. But you do have a notepad on the side, yeah?
100% for many, many reasons. Mostly to be able to go back and substantiate why you're scoring somebody what they are, and hopefully you're seeing a few people. But we talked earlier about displaying competence.
Yeah.
And you want to be precise with your notes. And when you're having an example and you're probing in and you're talking about something that happened 4 or 5 years ago or 2 years ago, and you're asking the person's name and you're saying where you want to demonstrate competence as a leader yourself by being precise with what you retain and what you're asking. So, I just don't have time to waste. So I need to make sure the relevant things are captured. And I'm sure everybody's listening also is feeling that, But when you're in an interview, and there's nothing like it at the end of the interview or even in follow-up, and you say, I just want to ask you one more question. Back in 2017, when you were in Michigan and you were talking to Stephen Smith about this, you said that this happened. I just want to be clear. Did this happen or did that happen with that person, Donald?
And that was an hour and a half ago in the conversation.
Yeah.
So my feeling, if I'm being interviewed by you,
is like,
you have your stuff together.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, that's not, I guess somebody can consider that a tactic. That's not as much a tactic to do anything, but it's just being precise will send the right message. It'll attract the A players. It'll save you time. It'll get you to your outcome quicker. So your question was, do you take notes? Yeah, I don't know how someone can have time not to take notes. So
Totally.
yeah.
Okay. Good. So that's that kind of focused probing. One of the things you said to me earlier is that it's really only after this that you're opening up to their questions, and I guess in a typical sense, like selling some value. Why do you do that later as opposed to opening with that and having like a half-hour conversation just about their questions and things? How come you leave that for the end?
Yeah. Well, okay. Two answers to that question. One is I'm comfortable getting some questions at the beginning. I'm not going to answer them though. And the reason I'm not going to answer them is because this isn't an information session. This is an interview.
Right.
I'm assuming that we've gone through the steps so that the person has a general understanding of what the role is. I'm putting myself in the shoes of your audience. There's been a qualifying call. Maybe there's been some steps to lead up to that. I've got the time blocked in my calendar. I am here to do three things: score a person on whether or not they're going to move forward in the process or not, understand where their gaps are, and sell them to the next step, if there's somebody that is a fit. If this is an info session, then it's different, right? And I'm sure you guys have all kinds of tools and mechanisms on how to use content and get things to people in advance and save time. So that's the answer. I think it's Igor, it's okay to get people's questions up front. If I were to do that, depending on how you're managing time, or something we haven't talked about also is group interviews. Maybe we should talk about that for a minute. But if I don't really know where they're at, I might do that at the front end, and I'm going to take notes. And that's also going to help me maybe hit on some things throughout my questions, and it's going to equip me for how much time I'm going to need at the end. Yeah. But it's also going to tell me what kind of homework they did. But usually I'll leave it to the bottom end. Yeah,
totally. It's a really good point. My process has always been is we would have an info meeting, or what we sometimes call a discovery meeting prior. Yeah. And I love that distinction that James brings it. That is different than being interviewed. One of the things you and I have spoken about previously, when we didn't mention it directly when we started here, but it is a very important bit, is you talk about the energy shift when moving into an interview, because there's the rapport, kind of, as you say, getting somebody ready, like set up for a great conversation and getting them open. You talk a bit about this energy shift. Like, it's very clear that this is getting serious now. Like, we're diving into you and your background and qualifying you as a fit, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
You want me to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, please.
Okay. And the point you made about that we were talking about info session versus an interview, again, coming back to focus, having a person focused on this in your business, even if you think you can't afford it and you're not there yet, that eliminates that, because that recruiter's job is to make sure that the people are clear on the opportunity before they meet with you.
Yeah.
Totally.
So if you can delegate that, if growth is what you're looking for, I highly recommend it. But the energy shift, it just has to do with persona, and it's been my experience that, and going way back, probably what I would have been attracted to as a young business person is you want to show that you want to have empathy and connect with the people, and you want to be real, and you want to be transparent, so that you're a human being, and that's kind of the rapport piece, and just that's kind of the opening. Obviously, being professional. The whole overarching piece is, will they follow you, right? Will they want to trust you as a leader? But that opening, make them feel comfortable, right? You want somebody to feel comfortable so it's easier for them to be genuine, and obviously easier for them to get to truth. Yeah. And they feel that in the short period that, hey, I can trust Benji, right? Like, seems like a fairly good fellow. The shift then moves to just, I would describe it as focus, right? And you go from, okay, so we're having a great little connection here, and happy to, can we shift gears? I'm going to move to digging into some questions. And often, Igor, what I'll do is, or in years gone by, or the audience where they're at with growing small businesses, what I'd recommend is actually contract with the candidate and say, so we're going to shift right now. And if it feels like I'm pushing, or I may have to cut you off, or I'm being a bit more assertive, that's not that I don't want to hear what you have to say. I have a number of things I want to get through. Right. I've got some very specific things I need to get to here today. And I'd like to get started with that. Are you comfortable with that? Yes, I'm comfortable with that. Okay. Then I am focused on asking them questions about these experiences. I'm not trying to make them happy. I'm not trying to make them sad. Emotion is kind of gone. Yeah. Because at that point, what I'm doing is I have a very limited amount of time to get what I need, which is where does Joe stack up on this criteria?
Yeah.
And as you do that, a byproduct of that is people generally will experience that as being a little bit unique because the norm out there, even in mid-management or it's my experience anyways, is that's not clear with interviewers, that there's a start, you connect with the person, there's a time where you're actually probing in, and I'm not talking about being a jerk, but there is you can physically feel the focus shift in the room.
Right.
Then when you're done that, it's like, okay, now we're gonna have a conversation again. We're just gonna hey, chat, like what do you want to know? What can I tell you? What do you know about the organization? And just so that you know, I'm actually not interviewing you for this job. I'm actually interviewing you for the job, as I do always, two roles down the chain 2 years from now. And if you want to know more about that, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Just the persona shifts.
The intensity kind of eases off again at
Yeah.
the end.
Yeah. But focused intensity. Yeah. It shifts a bit.
This is huge, guys. I want to capture this because this is such a massive point. I think a lot of people, even the ones that recognize the importance of selling in an interview, will see that in its classic sense, that you need to take the time, you need to understand the candidate's needs, you need to speak to the role, the company, the journey in a way that's going to make sense to them. And all that stuff is super important. And by the way, I have one quick question for you on that in a moment. But what I think James is highlighting here that is so fundamental to being a great interviewer is that so much of the selling comes from the way that you go about the business of interviewing. And anyone that's sat in a room with James will know this. It is so clear how experienced he is and how serious he is about his time and not wasting it. His ability to interview, to lead, to run an organization is crystal clear just in that hour and a half of him diving into your background. That's the real selling right there. And that's powerful. It brings me back. We had Angus Reid here, the national champion football player, and one of the questions I remember him saying he was pushed on by his coach is, how good do you want to be? And I think when you get to a point, if you want to be extraordinary at interviewing, you need to get to a point where the competence and the selling of why someone would want to follow you and work in the company will come from how well you execute as an interviewer. And that's really amazing.
You said you had another question. I have a question for you first. Actually, it's a comment on something that you said earlier. Is in order to do that, you have to make sure that the interview is set up to be an interview. And that's a difference between an information meeting and an interview. So if you've got somebody that's a great candidate and they don't really know what it is they're applying for, stop everything. It's okay. Don't do an interview. They're not ready yet.
They're not ready yet, totally.
Yeah, you can't skip that step because they're not even informed, on what, like, fully on what the role is. So when you say sales manager, what does that mean? Am I actually selling? Am I, one person reporting to me or 15, right?
Yeah.
So just your comment on kind of making sure that painting the picture of the job and making sure people are clear on what it is they're applying for is done in advance that's so important, because that then allows you to say, okay, you know what I'm talking about. I know what I'm talking about. We're clear. Now let's talk about you.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, total distinction between an information session or a discovery meeting, whatever you want to call it, which is what's the company, what's the role you're applying for, what are the intricacies of the responsibilities look like. Completely different conversation than is the interview. Yeah. I remember, so James, you and I crossed paths literally in the hallway in my first year of college pro. We went on, we both spent, much before me, but we spent a lot of time hiring franchisees. I remember that system was taught so well. Like we would spend like an hour and a half with a prospective franchisee just talking about the role, right? And it was only then after, if it made potential sense as a fit, that they would get to an interview. Sometimes it's that extensive. And there's still roles that I hire for right now where it's like an hour and a half long discovery meeting, whether I'm doing it or someone else is doing it. But you want to get the right people clear on what they're applying for.
Yeah, and if, because time is limited, right? And some people are listening to you right now, you're going, are you kidding me? You want to spend an hour and a half with someone talking about a lead technician role or an ops manager role? So you got to do it. But if you don't have the hour and a half, figure out a system to do it. So what I would say is, I'm sure you guys could lead something like this, but just record a video or record a video on something. Totally. But even if it's just like low tech on your iPhone, here is what the job is. Here's what the career path is for the job. Here's where I'm going with my organization. These are my 3 most commonly asked questions when I talk to people about the role. Here's what success looks like. Here's how the compensation structure is, and here's what our culture's like. Now, if you have questions before the interview, get back to me with da-da-da-da. and away you go. Even something like that, it can save you time, but just the importance of what you said is so critical.
Yeah. Love it. That's such a great bit. And you will often, I think, see a lot about the candidate based on how well they've thought through that and prepared stuff.
Sure.
If they really respect your time. One other thing I just want to highlight from our conversation when we talked last week, James, is one of the things you said that from a selling perspective, you talked about the journey that you're taking people on and the fact that you're interviewing them and often looking at them for 1 to 2 roles ahead of where they are. From your experience, what are high performers attracted to? If you're going to speak to them about anything, you've got only, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes at the end of an interview, and they're asking you questions about the organization and where the role goes. Why is this journey thing so important for high performers?
Yeah, so I think that somebody that is, anywhere from an average to a top candidate should be given the opportunity to have a clear picture painted for how they could advance your organization. And I say that because often as interviewers, you can almost assume that someone can take for advantage. Like, of course they would know that there might be an opportunity. Don't take that for
explain it.
Yeah, don't take that for granted. I said advantage for granted. Take the time, explain it, give them specifics, give them examples if you have any of people that have been promoted or moved up in your organization. That speaks to your culture. It speaks to your track record, and it's a powerful message to say that you're already thinking about progression from within, and it's how you want to grow your business. So just the point is, don't take it for granted. Always have that part of your, not just your onboarding process, but even starting in your interviewing process so that people see the opportunity.
Yeah. So when you close out an interview, coming to the end of one of these meetings, there's one thing that I've heard you talk about before, which is like doing a trial close, especially on your top candidates. For our listeners, like, what is a trial close? Why do you do one?
Yeah, a trial close is a conditional close, trial or conditional. So it means if a condition happens, would you make a decision? So what that looks like is, Benji, thanks for your time today. I've got a lot of notes here and we're going to reflect on this, and obviously got a lot of candidates we're going to talk to, but if I were to offer you the job, would you want the job?
Yes.
That's trial close.
Why is that so important to do?
I feel like right now I should ask you because you know the answer too, but the reason it's important is you need to gauge where that person is at and their desire, and you're trying to surface objections, right? If they have left something on the table that they're concerned about, or the question they don't have answered, someone likely will not say yes when you say, if I offer you the job, would you take it? Or often it's not would I offer you the job, it's if I offered to connect with you again, would you want to spend some time together again, right? Whatever the next step is in the journey. But yeah, you want to make sure that you're trial closing on every step of the way. Yeah.
And so you can uncover those objections, because what you don't want is to the work point where you've selected the candidate that you want to hire, and then you go to hire them and it turns out they have 4 objections that you never brought to the surface to
actually
even be able to
address. I wasn't really sure about this, and then it's way too late.
It's interesting, Benji, on that question. Something that in my experience, I've seen people often misinterpret also with the trial closes. If someone says no, that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that they're not a great candidate, and that doesn't mean that you shouldn't still, potentially hire this person, right? But often, I've heard or experienced that people will say, well, they're not a 10 out of 10, or they don't want the job, therefore why would I offer them the job? Well, the answer is because you probably missed something in your conversation with them.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
So just to everybody, if I say to Igor, hey, do you want to meet again? And he says, I don't know, I'll think about it. That doesn't necessarily mean Igor's a bad guy. It means
there's some objection there.
Yeah, there's something there. So okay, well, let's unpack that for a second. Seems like something's on your mind. Like what would make you want to meet with me again, Igor? So,
100%.
Cool. Yeah. Okay, so just to recap here, the actual process of an interview we've gone over. And just by the way, listeners, if you want to look at this framework, it will be in the show notes. There is a rapport building section. You set super, super clear purpose and outcomes. Then you have that shift in energy. Hey, we're gonna get to the interview part here. I'm gonna be a little bit more assertive. That's sort of like the, if you wanted to call it, you're grilling the person. That's the part where you are legitimately asking questions, looking for evidence of the traits you want to see. You'd sell some value. You have a clear close, next step. And if you need to trial close, you would do that in there as well. So that's kind of the process of the interview. I really encourage, if you're listening to this, go download this template and use it at your next interview. It's going to make your life a lot easier. Shifting gears just out of the process of an interview, James, like skills, experience, personality, previous education, that's one thing. What are your thoughts on like how do you interview for core values?
Yeah. Well, a lot of it's similar to what we talked about earlier. Like it would be like when you say core values, I would start with really clearly defining what your core values are. And that's probably the hardest part. That's the hard work, right? Like to you, what really matters?
I'll give you an example. Like BTA's core values are be real, genuinely care about people, and embrace the journey. So let's say like if we said genuinely care about people is something we got to make sure that this person has that value. How might we go about looking for that in their background?
Yeah. So two thoughts on that. The first one is values. So one, I would, like I said a minute ago, define what those are. You guys are very clear on that. You know what they are, right? You know what you're looking for. If your listeners are not clear, start with that.
Yeah.
So just that, and that's hard work, right? Like, is it this or is it this? Because I can give you 15 values and say which are important. You say all of them, right? But which are the core four? So once you've got that nailed, the two pieces to the answer would be values are generally something. If you're doing good probing in their previous experiences, they will surface. How someone engaged with someone, how someone walked through a challenging situation, how they navigated a conflict, how they walked through change, how they made decisions. Their values show up in times of friction, right? In those highs and those lows and those decision-making times. That's where your values are on stage. It's not when life is easy. So it's going to show up. So you're going to be grabbing some notes there. And depending on the individual, sometimes you just out of that, you will have a very clear picture on how this person behaves, in those times. The second piece is go through yours again, Benji.
Our values?
Yeah.
Be real.
Yeah.
Genuinely care about people.
Yeah.
And embrace the journey.
Okay. So in addition to paying attention to it through the probing, which is I generally would look at values last because I want to get surface all the examples of their life first. Genuinely care for people.
Yeah.
So I would just tell them what my values are. I say, here's what's important to us, BTA. And so I want to talk to you about genuinely caring for people. So Benji, when you think about genuinely caring for people, what I'd like to know is, can you tell me about a specific time where it was really, really hard for you to show that you really cared about somebody?
Right.
And then say nothing.
And I, as the interviewee, would be going back through my experience going, okay, when I was, when I was much younger in my teenage years, I had this huge fight with my brother, blah, blah, blah. I'd actually unpack the...
But that's the key is when was it difficult?
That's it. You got
Yeah.
it. Yeah, that's it. Right. So it's not when have you showed you've cared for people, or say somebody says honesty is a core value of theirs. When were you honest? Well, hopefully you're honest every day.
Yeah.
Right. That doesn't mean it's a core value of yours. Right. What matters is when your honesty is challenged, how do you show up? So what I want to probe for is not do you do what you say, but when did you deliver what you promised, or when did you do what you said when it was really hard to do that?
Yeah.
Got it.
And again, as we talked about earlier, if the value's there, that won't be hard for a person to tell you.
Totally.
It's there. And if you don't see the example, or they're confused, or if they're really struggling, that is the result of the question you're looking for. And the answer is, it's not there.
Right.
100%.
Right.
Yeah. Very good. Before we close out, James, I got two quick questions for you here. I have been on the receiving end of reference checks from you, and it has been extraordinarily clear how much you know about candidates at that point and what you're trying to get out of me as the reference check receiver. And we of course we could have a whole episode with you on reference checks in general, but let me just ask you one quick question. In your eyes, what is the purpose of a reference check?
It's a continuation of the interview process. So the three reasons that we talked about to do an interview, no change there. That's what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to understand their past behavior so you can predict future performance and make your decision and score them and know where to coach them and sell. But the purpose of the reference check is to validate or to find gaps. Like sometimes in an interview, you will just run out of time, right? That's something that I, have often found. You have X amount of time allotted, and it's a good chunk of time. You get a couple gaps. You can bring them back. Sometimes you get one more thing. You want to supplement that with a reference check. Ideally, ideally, what you want is you want your main criteria scored. You've got examples or no examples. And if they're continuing, how I would coach people to do this is your reference check is to substantiate and validate what you think you saw.
Right.
Right? Because you've got this person, let's say it's a technical competency. You're hiring a project manager and they're talking about their specific examples of, as a PM of, what they've done and the challenges and their learning and experience and whatnot. And what you want to do is you want to validate that because that's you going, yep, I've got it right or I've got it wrong. The other reason to do a reference check is to fill in the gaps. So if you haven't quite been able to completely round out your perspective of the candidate, you use it to go where you weren't able to go with the candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. Key point there is you're going into the reference check knowing what you're trying to get at it. It's not a casual chat of, hey, Jim, so you worked with Mark? Great. Yeah, he's a great guy, isn't he? That's not a reference check.
Yeah, no. I get calls, or I'm sure you guys have over the years, many times from many people checking references. Hi, just wanted to see if you'd hire them again. And my answer is, I have no idea. Can you back up and tell me what you're hiring the person for?
Yeah.
What are you asking me?
Totally.
The answer is maybe not. I don't know. It could be a great person. Often people think reference check is about how much you like the person, or it could be around corporate culture and fit, right?
Yeah.
That's a thing, but that's a waste of a phone call.
Yeah.
Right. I would say be very specific and have a couple of specific things, and you are interviewing that reference check.
Totally.
Don't waste the time. Say, okay, do you have 15 minutes? Do you have 10 minutes? Okay, there's a couple of very specific things I want to ask you. Can you give me examples? And if it's there, the examples will come easily. And then you don't just take one example, you probe. Tell me more about that. When was that? And if it's not there, it's not there.
Yeah. Amazing. Love it. Final quick one from you. Something I've heard you talk about, Brian Scudamore at O2E Brands talks about, Eric Church, this beer and barbecue test. When we've talked a lot about are they competent? Are they the right fit in terms of their ability to perform? When it comes to organizational culture fit, what do you guys at O2E mean by this beer and barbecue test?
Yeah, it's pretty much spot on what you said, cultural fit, right? You spend a lot of time with the people that you work with.
Log a lot of hours, yeah.
The two of you guys probably spend a lot of hours together. Is this the type of person you're going to want to invite over and have a backyard barbecue with? And, different people, depending on their level of extroversion or introversion, will have a higher orientation to wanting to be around just more people and some less so. But at the end of the day, that test of do they fit me wanting to invest time and spend time with them, and not just me. It's actually had nothing to do with me. It has to do with the rest of the team.
Would they fit in on a backyard barbecue with the team? Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. Do they fit? And you kind of know what your vibe is, what your culture is, and for us, with our brands, that's really important. We can have a very, very competent person, and I know you guys get this, but if the cultural fit isn't there, it's just not going to work. It'd be very painful.
Yeah, right? Amazing, great, James. What I love about this chat and every one of my other interactions with you is just your presence, how much you're here, how you listen, how focused you are wherever you might be. It's such a special trait that's not common, I think, especially in our distracted world, which is getting even more so every day. I just want to close out with one final question on this for you is how did you become that way? I think that's one of the things that if someone asked me what is James Alisch, that would be one of the first things that comes to mind. How did you nurture that for yourself? And why is it so important in business, not just in interviewing, but everywhere as a leader?
First thing, I hope my wife doesn't see this because she'd be falling off her chair in laughter right now. My kids as well. But thank you. I'll take it. I think when I hear you say that, I think number one, I really, really value that. So to me, it's very meaningful when someone works hard at listening, and I feel valued. Right. I feel respected, and that was probably ingrained in me in a very young age. I was fortunate enough to have that role modeled for me through a number of different people. So it's kind of one of those things when you get to see it and you get to taste, and you're like, wow, that's important. I really like that. that's probably the root of it. And then over time, realizing that it is really hard to do in today's distracted world and how busy we all are. And it's just hard, right? Really being a great listener is really hard. And I'm not a great listener, just to be clear. I'm not. I'm terrible. I work at it. And the reason I work at it is because I am highly committed to the value of it, right? So I started by saying I value of it, but if you can cultivate a relationship where people almost to a point of feeling it's unique, or they feel it's actually quite, not surprising, but it's odd how hard this person is trying to understand what I'm saying. Whether it's what you're doing right now, like focused, listening, dialed in, how you play back to someone, how you slow down, how you're not listening to answer, you're slow to defend. You always ask another couple of questions to understand and to probe before you answer. It's a unique thing.
It's memorable.
And it's memorable. That's a great word. It's memorable, and it makes people feel respected and valued, right? And I'm not great at it, so I'm so it's hard, but I think those are the reasons. I value it. Like, it's a really important thing, and it doesn't just show up in an interview. Like, it's not like it's definitely, we've talked about it today. It's the core of an interview, right? Because you got a limited amount of time. You got to listen to what you're hearing and leverage it. But it's an all the time, every day challenge and skill that I believe is a leadership trait that is critical. And leaders that I work with, I know, work really hard at it, and I'm really, really privileged to work with some exceptional people that are great listeners and cultivate a culture of people feeling valued and respected. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Absolutely, yeah. It's just it is fascinating to hear how much you do work on it, and maybe I guess it doesn't come naturally.
It will always be, totally.
But I will say it is memorable. I remember meeting you in the hallway of the College Pro office on that staircase, if you remember.
It was a long time ago,
2006. And that still to this day stands out about you. So it is truly, I think, something for it as a leader, as a kind of a fundamental skill in a leader's tool belt. Something to work on, because it applies to so many of the disciplines within business.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. James, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
For spending the time with us.
Thanks for having.
And we really appreciate it.
Awesome. Anytime, guys. Thanks.
Thanks so much for watching this episode of Contractor Evolution. If you've already subscribed to our channel, consider sharing this episode with another contractor who you think needs to hear it.